Well, welcome everyone to this edition of Stories for Healing. As you know by now, this is a project that started on all days on Halloween to try and bring a little extra light to this world. It's been such a divisive and frightening and anxiety producing period for us all around the world that I felt like as a storyteller, what do I do? Well, the answer is obvious. You tell stories, especially if you're like me, a transformational storyteller, which simply means that we're trying to help people open up to inspiration and healing and growth. That's all it means. And so we've been very successful at this without ever expecting this to happen. We're having storytellers literally from around the world to join us and share their talents and their open hearts with us to try and help this continue in the direction of healing. Today, we're very fortunate. We have a storyteller who's going to tell us a story from across the pond, as we say in this country. Baya, would you please tell us a story?
I would love to tell you a story, and it's very, for me, it's an important story. It's always been an important story. I love that story, but it's the last story I told to a live audience. It was on the 9th of March, 2020, and it was for International Women's Day. And I told to a bunch of women the story of Silver Hands. And the story has kind of haunted me ever since because it was so strange. It was the last story I told. And it's a story that exists more or less all over the world. There's different versions everywhere. It's a very similar story. It's the story of Cinderella, but it is different. It was a terrible year. A year that nobody had ever encountered, an unprecedented year, they said. Their harvest had failed. There had been terrible fires and there was a plague in the land, so it was said, and my father was distraught. He was quite a big farmer in the area where we lived, and the crops had failed. He had no money left in the bank. The house was mortgaged to the hilt, so he didn't know what to do. And the winter was coming. It was going to be a cold one. And he was reduced to going into the forest to get some bits of wood fallen from the trees. The man who used to have a gold chain across his waistcoat and a hidden gold watch in his pocket. The man who used to have a hat rakishly perched on his head. A man who had servants and he had to let them all go. And he walked in the forest, my father did, despondent, didn't know what to do. When suddenly he heard a rustling and he turned to his right, and behind a tree he saw a shape materialize, and he also smelled something peculiar. He didn't know quite what it was. He realized it was a smell very similar to the smell of melting iron. It was odd in the middle of the forest. But anyway, he shrugged his shoulders and turned towards the man who had just come out from behind the tree and saluted him and said, "Hello, stranger, how can I help you? Are you lost?" And the stranger said, "Oh, no. I can help you, my good man. I can help you." And my father said, "Why do you need that? Why do you think I need help?" And the man said, "Well, I have heard that you're in trouble, my good man, and I am prepared to help you. I'm feeling generous today, and I can give you back all your wealth and more. And provided you give me whatever it is that's behind your house right now, whatever it is, doesn't matter. I'm a very generous man." And my father, he thought to himself, what's behind the house? What's behind the... And he remembered that behind the house, in the yard, there was a very old apple tree, which didn't bring many apples to us in the autumn. And it was all, well, if he wants the apple tree, very welcome to it. So he said yes, and they spat in their hand, and they shook on it, and then, well, the stranger sort of disappeared. And my father went home, and as he was walking towards the farm, he saw his wife, my mother, run out of the farm in hysterics. She was beside herself. Husband, what have you done? What have you done? And my father said, well, what do you mean, woman, what have I done? I've done nothing. And then in front of his very own eyes, he saw the farmhouse sort of transform itself, become richer and better somehow, and everything that was slightly wrong with it straightened itself, and his wife, as she was running towards him, appeared to have her clothes changed, and her hands were laden with rings, and he looked down and he was dressed richly again, and his golden watch was there once again. He was amazed. But she wasn't impressed. Husband, what have you done? Tell me, what have you done, you fool? Well, wife, why are you making such a fuss? I only gave a stranger whatever is behind our house. At which point she fell dead in a dead faint. He revived her and said, what's the matter with you, woman? Why are you fainted? You're not the fainting kind. You fool, she said, with tears streaming down her face. You foolish man, our daughter, that's me, our daughter is behind the house. She's sweeping the yard. So they came to me and told me what had happened, and explained to me that the man was coming to get me in a year and a day, and to prepare myself. I was only 15, and well, what do you do? I mean, they explained it was really important, it had to be done, and it was my duty, and I was helping my family, and well, I did it, and I waited a year and a day, and on the day I made my wedding dress, and I dressed in white, and I obviously bathed and washed my hair before, and then I drew a circle with chalk, and I stepped in the middle of it, and I waited for my husband, and he did turn up, but he took one look at me and he was horrified and screeched horribly and said, you're not good at all. There's absolutely no way I can take you away with me. I forbid you to wash for a year and a day. I forbid you to clean your hair, brush your hair. I forbid you to wash your hands. I forbid you to change your dress. And I will come back to you in a year and a day. You will not be inside the circle, and you will be taken away with me. So what could I do? I did what I was told. My parents said it was the right thing to do, so I did it. And a year and a day passed. It wasn't very, very pleasant, I'm telling you. And on the day, I felt there was something wrong, you know. Not enough for me to do something about it, because after all, you know, it was my duty and all that, but I knew there was something wrong. And when I stood in the backyard, not in a circle this time, with my disgusting hair all matted, and that white dress I had made with all hope in my heart, all grey and shredded, I wept. And as I wept, the tears, you know, like tears are sometimes quite salty and hurt your eyes, and I rubbed my eyes with my hand, and my hand that were black with the filth of a year and a day, well, they turned white with my tears. And when the man came to collect me, he was horrified and said, I told you not to wash. I told you not to wash. And he pointed to my father and he said, you, man, cut her hands off. Father did. He took a silver-tipped axe and he cut my hands off, just like that. And I fainted. Obviously, I did. And such anger that my parents could do that to me, that my father could cut my hands off. How could he? And it wasn't enough anyway, because the man left. I wasn't even good enough for him. Without the hand, I was worthless. I don't know. So when I came out of my swoon, they bathed me and they bandaged me, and they were very sorry, and they said they would look after me all my life. But I was so angry. I was so angry that I ran away. There's nothing at all, because I couldn't carry anything. I had no hands, remember? And I walked until I got to an orchard, but the orchard was a pear orchard, was on the other side of a river. And I was so thirsty and so hungry by then. And I prayed and I prayed and I said, if there was one way I could get to the pears. And the bridge appeared, just like that. And I walked across the bridge and I got into the orchard and there were these pears, but they were too high. I couldn't reach even on my tiptoes. And don't forget, I had no hands. And eventually one tree took pity on me. And the pear went down to my mouth and I was able to eat it. And it was the most delicious pear you've ever eaten. And it filled my stomach and I fell asleep. To be woken up by a very angry voice. A man was shouting at another man. How could you let somebody into my orchard? I've counted the pears. There's a pear missing. And the voice getting closer to me until eventually the voice was over me. And I looked up and there was this man and he looked down on me and he said, oh my God, who are you? And then he stopped. And he said, you're so beautiful. Marry me. And I thought, well, I don't know him, but what options do I have? I have nothing left, nothing to go back to, nothing to go forward to. And I said, yes, I married him. He was pleasant enough. On our wedding day, he presented me with a pair of silver hands that magically you could sort of click onto my stumps. And he was so proud of them. They were so special. They were so expensive. I never had the heart to tell him they hurt like anything, that I hated them with a passion, that they felt alien to me, that they did things without my knowing. I hated them. But I never said anything because he was so pleased with himself, you see. And after all, what did I know, eh? What did I know? Until one day I'd had enough. A couple of months later, my stumps were raw with it. He was going on and on about it. He kept showing the hands to everyone. It became embarrassing. And I just lost my temper one night. On my own, you understand. I never told him how I felt. And I tore the silver hands away. And I ran away again. I took them with me because I thought they might be valuable. And I ran away with nothing again. And I walked and I walked and I walked until finally I found myself in the middle of a forest. I don't know where it was. In a clearing, there was a small house. And I knocked with my stump on the door of the small house. And there was a woman that opened the door. And she said, welcome, my dear. And I was so surprised. I said, well, how do you know me? And she said, I don't. But I know you wouldn't be here if you did not need my help. So welcome, come in. So I did. And you know what? She was lovely. I told her the whole story and she listened. And I told her how I felt and she listened. And then little by little, she helped me to understand who I was, to understand how to behave, to understand how to tell people how I felt, but also how to grow things and how to make clothes and how to cook. And I know you're going to wonder, how could I do that without hands? But you see, what happened was a miracle. One day, not very long after I got to the house, little bud happened in the middle of my wrist, a tiny little knob. And I was quite worried. And I said to her, what is this? She said, never mind, my dear, never mind. And the next day it was a bit bigger. And then it grew and it became a baby's hand. And as I was learning how to be myself, how to live in the world, how to do the things I needed to do to look after myself, my hands grew back. And they were better, and they were stronger, and they were harder. And it was rather wonderful. And once the hands had grown back to full maturity, I woke up one morning and the woman was gone. And there was a note on the kitchen table and it said, this is yours now. Somebody comes knocking, let them in with love. So nobody came in. I spent a lot of time on my own, and it was tough at first, but I learned how to do it. And then I grew my own food, and I got a goat, and I made my own cheese, and I got chickens, and I got a dog, and I was very content in my house in the forest. I never went very far, you know. And finally, one night, it was a stormy night near Samhain, and there was a knock at the door. And I thought, at last I can repay the woman's gift. And I opened the door, and there was a man there. He looked haggard. He looked distraught. He looked wet. So I let him in, and I sat him by the fire, and he told me his story. How his wife had left 7 years ago, and how he couldn't understand why. And how he'd set off in pursuit of her, and how for the 7 years he'd tried to understand why she'd left. He loved her so much, you see, and he still didn't know. So I settled him down in the sitting room, obviously on the sofa, and I went to bed. The next morning, when I woke up, I could hear somebody crying downstairs, and I went down, and there was the man, and oh my God, he had the silver hands in his hands. Do you remember the silver hands? I'd completely forgotten about them. I'd left them in a cupboard somewhere. And there they were. And he looked at me and he said, "It's you, isn't it?" And I looked at him and I said, "Oh my, it's you, isn't it?" Because we looked the same, but not the same at all. And he said, holding the hands, "I am so sorry," he said. "I was only thinking of myself, wasn't I, when I bought you those hands? I never asked if you wanted them. I just thought I would surprise you, I would be clever. I wasn't, was I? And you never felt you could tell me how bad it was." And I said, and I was foolish, because I blamed everybody else but myself. I was foolish because I didn't come and talk to you, even though by that point I knew you loved me so much. And he said, "Well, shall we try again?" And we sat down and we talked about it. And he said, "Well, shall we go back to the castle? Shall we go back to our old life, our normal life?" And we decided not to, not now anyway. So there we are in the woods with the cat and the dog and the chickens and the goats. We're thinking of getting a cow, and we're getting to know each other for real this time. As to the silver hands, well, we're going to keep them, you see, just in case we forget. But I don't think we shall, because we're new people now. We know exactly who we are. And that is the story of Silver Hands.
Oh, tremendous. What a beautiful story. Oh,
Now I can put my glasses
you
back
can
on.
put your glasses on so you can see.
I can see, yes, because otherwise I can't see. But for some reason, I hate telling stories with my glasses on. Don't ask.
So I love the story. I love the way you tell it. I have a question about the voice you told it in. So you told it from the woman's voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what was your thinking behind, of all the voices and all the perspectives you might have told it from? Why
I find that stories tell themselves through me. And today she wanted to tell her story.
Yes.
Sometimes the father wants to tell the story. Sometimes it's the prince. But today she just wanted to tell her story. And even though I rehearse my stories, obviously, I was working on it this morning, and it was a completely different voice that came out, and she needed to be heard. And I think it's those stories are very strange because they don't have any names in them. Mm-hmm. This woman has no name. It's called Silver Hand or the Handless Maiden, but she has no name. Nobody in it has any name. Right. And it's quite strange, really. And I think that's why. But also, I guess, as I've been, you can interpret stories the way you want to interpret it. But for me, this story is about personal responsibility for me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as as the last 8 months have evolved, and this story had been in my mind because it was the last story I told, and I thought, you know what stories are like? It's like, I told you last, you must mean something. You were here to help me through this, because otherwise you wouldn't be the one I told last. And yeah, it's about, in the story, it's only when she actually starts saying I, and saying this is my problem and I need to sort it out, that she starts to change. And I think that's
And,
why.
and I think the other thing I'll say, because of that, it is about personal responsibility, but it's also about the ability to change. And we
Yeah.
don't see that. I don't think we would see that as clearly if it was told
Mm,
from a third
mm,
person. So we
mm.
get to see that all.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's totally. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
totally true. Yeah.
Another wonderful episode of Stories for Healing. I want to thank you all for being part of this, because you know it it's as healing for us as storytellers to tell these stories as hopefully it is for you to hear them. We collaborate in that way, even though we're separated by time and distance and whatever else. Um, and perhaps that's the real lesson here, is that we can heal ourselves and each other if we just listen and tell with an open heart. So come back. We're here, as you know, twice a day. And we appreciate the many of you who have joined us already, and look forward to welcoming you in the days to come. Thanks.